All right, welcome back to another episode of Hard Money Dispatch. Today, Bitcoin looks to be entering a bear market, quite likely. This is not financial advice, but in my opinion, it looks most likely that this is not just a typical 30% price retracement. There's a lot of technical indicators like the close beneath the 50-week moving average, simple moving average, which has always indicated a bear market in the past. And it looks like this week, I'm recording this on Saturday, 22nd of November, looks like this week will be the second weekly close in a row beneath that trend line. So the odds are looking pretty high that this cycle is playing out more or less like other cycles with the peak in October or November. But no one really knows for sure. In my opinion, that's the most likely scenario. But you never know. It could be, I stumbled across an article from Bitcoin Magazine earlier this year. I think it was like June or July it was published, talking about how the cycle could just be lengthening and there could be a new all-time high of, around 200,000 in about May of next year. One way or another, though, we'll know by May or June of next year. It'll either be 60,000 or 200,000. There's not a whole lot of, those are the most likely things by far. There's always a chance the price could go sideways from now until then. That's probably not very likely. Again, this is just my opinion. It's not financial advice. And I do have to admit I was completely wrong. I believed that by this time of year, there'd be a much higher six-figure number. And I don't think I'm alone in that. A lot of people believed this cycle would top out at more like 200,000, 300,000, or even much higher. And looks like that's probably not going to be the case. But of course, if you have a 4-year longer time frame, it's not going to matter anyway. I remember back in June of 2022, I was interviewed by an Israeli TV outlet called I-24 News. And the last question the newscaster asked me was, is now a good time to buy? And I always hesitate to answer that in such a public setting, but when people ask me personally, I say it's always a good time to buy. That's always my answer. And as long as you have, the one caveat to that is that you always have to have at least a 4-year time span. And the reason for that is if you look at the 200-week moving average of Bitcoin, it's only ever gone up. There's never been a significant downtrend for that for all of Bitcoin's history. And that reflects the fact that if you hold it for 4 years or more, you will protect yourself from fiat monetary debasement. Now, if you're just looking to trade or you just get in and out, can't handle the volatility for longer than a few weeks or months at a time, then you shouldn't have any kind of meaningful allocation, in my opinion. But if you're really in it for the long term, something to hold for years, decades, even give to your children and grandchildren, then you really like these downturns and even long-term bear markets, because if you're dollar cost averaging every week or month, then this is the best time for you because you get more coins, more Satoshis at a lower price. And you shouldn't be too concerned about the price, whatever it's doing, if you have that long-term mindset and you're just dollar cost averaging consistently, then you're not really too concerned with what the price is. But some reasons for this downturn include things like long-term holders exiting their positions because now the market's finally liquid enough to absorb significant selling pressure, with institutions in play and Bitcoin treasury companies. And you can't really blame them. If they had been holding for 5, 10, 12 years, it makes sense to want to rebalance a little, even though theoretically that doesn't make sense, because why would you sell the harder currency for a weaker currency that's going to depreciate? But it does make sense from a personal perspective because, and this will happen to everyone eventually, if they continue holding on, then at some point your Bitcoin position will become an outsized portion of your net worth. It'll become the majority of your net worth. So then during these downswings, you'll have to just live with the fact that 30% or 50% of your net worth just kind of goes away, just evaporates in a matter of weeks or months. And it makes sense that most people would not want to tolerate that, so they take some profits. And mentioning treasury companies, there's a lot of them that seem to be in trouble. People always talk about MicroStrategy. They're actually in the best position. If Bitcoin tanked very quickly to low 5 figures, might be a problem for them. But it looks like the way they've taken intelligent leverage and the way that they've structured everything, they can weather a downturn just like they did in 2022 and nothing bad happened. But their share price is not doing well at all. It's totally diverged from Bitcoin, so you have to admit that. And the smaller treasury companies, some of them could really struggle and even go bankrupt throughout this. I don't know that much about this topic, to be honest. It's just my opinion. And I've seen that some of them have actually been forced to sell, so that adds more selling pressure. And if you look at the order books on a major exchange like Coinbase, for example, it's looked pretty bad recently. There's so much sales pressure and not a whole lot of buying pressure. So it's all asks and no bid. And if you look at the depth chart, there's a lot more red than there is green. The Crypto Fear and Greed Index is an all-time low, I think, of 9. If you look at the CoinMarketCap Index, and there's other ones too, but that's the one I look at. So it's lower than COVID or the FTX collapse or anything that's happened, even the April tariff crash earlier this year, which is really kind of crazy because there's no significant impetus for this. It kind of just came out of nowhere, and maybe that's why. It's kind of a weird paradox, but maybe because there is no specific reason for the fear and the quote-unquote crash, maybe that adds to the fear and amplifies it because no one really has a way to explain it that well. There's a lot of positive developments fundamentally for Bitcoin. However, there's some negative ones too, and the macro outlook doesn't look that great. The Fed may not be lowering rates as much or as fast as expected, although the Fed funds rate futures market is still pricing in very high odds of a rate cut in December. It's really just commentary from Jay Powell and other Fed members that has modified that outlook somewhat recently. And stocks are also crashing for the most part. A lot of the big tech stocks are down 15 to 30%, so not all that different from Bitcoin. They have a comparable amount of volatility. And yeah, that's pretty much it for all the price stuff. I wanted to start with that because I know everyone's going to be thinking about it. That's what's on top of everyone's mind. But there's so many other things happening. One last thing I want to mention. The Bitcoin Core version 30, which I've talked about in other videos and podcasts, was released right about the time that this recent downtrend started. And correlation's not causation. It may or may not have anything to do with that, but you have to admit it's kind of interesting that timing just happens to coincide so perfectly, and it may not be an accident. I think a lot of people are concerned about that new version of the Bitcoin Core software, and rightfully so, because it allows any amount of arbitrary data to be included in a block. And I've talked about this before. I'm not going to go into it. It's something I'm personally against. People can be for it or against it or neutral. It doesn't really matter. In the big picture, it's kind of a good thing because it's led to the adoption of different types of node software, which increases the decentralization of the protocol. Knots is now the number one most used node software, I believe, with 20-something% of all nodes running it. And then the Bitcoin Commons, if you heard the last episode with Gil Roberts, Bitcoin Commons just launched the alpha version of their product. So if you have a Start 9 device, you can start running it today. So that will be a third option for Node software. And I look forward to, I don't have a Start 9, but at some point I look forward to running that on my node, because I think it'll probably be the best option for myself. So that's just kind of how Bitcoin works, and everybody can use it how they want, run their own node how they want, and have freedom and sovereignty in their savings and transactions. No one can take it from you. No one can tell you how to spend it, or if you can spend it, or where you can send it. No one can freeze the funds or stop the transactions, unlike many of these crypto blockchains, Solana, Ethereum, Tether, Circle. They're all centrally controlled, and there's someone who can freeze your wallet, stop your transactions, all of that. Whereas with Bitcoin, that is not the case. So moving on now, quick update on the Bitharvest Ponzi scheme. I made a YouTube video about that a few weeks ago, and it was only 8 minutes long, because that was all the research it took to show that this thing was clearly a Ponzi scheme. And it's very unfortunate these things still happen. It's basically the next Bitconnect. If anyone's been around that long, I think it was 2018 or so, that there was a Ponzi scheme called Bitconnect. And there's a famous meme of this guy on stage at some, I don't know what it was, some conference or talk or something, and he's just yelling in the microphone, Bitconnect! He's so stoked about this thing that's obviously a Ponzi scheme. And then it collapsed. I think that marked the peak. I think it collapsed like 6 to 12 months after that. For this Bitharvest thing, I thought maybe it would last 3 to 6 months, 3 to 12 months. Looks like it's already finished. They've already halted withdrawals. I've heard from multiple people. Someone commented on YouTube. Someone commented on LinkedIn. And I realize those are just social media comments, but I can't imagine why multiple people would say that if it wasn't true. And personally, I don't know how else to find out about that stuff, because it's, unless you're in it, you don't really have any knowledge of it. And I haven't researched it since then, but I will soon. And it wouldn't surprise me one bit if that's actually what's going on. They've halted withdrawals, and you can only take out this BHT token that they created that's worthless and constantly losing value. So it's very sad that a lot of people gave up their hard-earned coins for nothing, basically, for this thing that was just a Ponzi scheme. The owners just take coins from people and then make all these tiny transactions to people's wallets, so they think that they're participating in some legitimate investment. And then once they can no longer bring in enough new money to pay out old investors, then the thing collapses and they halt withdrawals and try to scramble to do some kind of image protection and make people think it's still legit. And then it's all downhill from there. And yeah, it's really sad. I wish I had covered it sooner, honestly, but I didn't know enough about it and didn't get a chance to make a video. I think I made the video like a few weeks after I first learned about it, if even. So I guess there's not much more I could have done. But hopefully someone saw that video or that LinkedIn post and stayed away from it as a result. But that's that. The Bitharvest thing is coming to an end. Or it's already come to an end, you could say, because people can't get their money out. So it's only a matter of time before the whole thing falls apart. And that's just a reminder to hold on to what you have in terms of Bitcoin, this hardest money ever created. There's no need to try and use it to generate more yield or get into some shady investment scheme that promises outlandish returns or has some type of product that sounds too good to be true. You really just, that's another version of people looking at this thing as a get-rich-quick scheme or purely speculating, when that's just not what it is. And I spent a lot of time and energy trying to explain to people that this is not purely speculative, and it's not a get-rich-quick scheme. It can help people get richer slowly over time, again, 4 to 10 years or more. But I've learned not to even bother for the most part. Most people don't want to know. That's why I create content like this. So if someone has tuned in, is interested enough, they can learn a little more. I also have a free report on the 3 problems that Bitcoin solves. Those being monetary debasement, potential confiscation, and censorship resistance. For those of us in the Western world, in first world countries, we really only have to be concerned about the monetary debasement part on a long-term time frame. At least that's what we tend to think here. Although there are times when confiscation or censorship do come into play. If you look at the Canadian trucker incident back in, I think it was 2021, for example, they were protesting a certain mandated medical procedure, and a bunch of people had their bank accounts frozen just for contributing to a GoFundMe that supported these protests. And so when that kind of thing happens, and there was no law passed, there was no voting process, it was just a handful of dictatorial politicians that decided to enact this all on their own. And people had no recourse. So the only thing you can do in that kind of situation is use Bitcoin. You can transact with it freely. And that's a powerful use case that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge for some reason. And the hedge against inflation is the thing everybody focuses on, at least here in the West, and everybody debates it and says, oh, look, it's too volatile or this or that. And again, that's only 1/3 of the picture, if you ask me. The second part is the censorship that I just mentioned. And then there's also the confiscation element, which kind of goes along with the censorship. They're, in a way, they're kind of two sides of the same coin because they both involve a centralized third party with too much power being able to control someone's transactions or accounts or savings. And confiscation is generally not a problem in the first world, but in many third world countries, it has been a problem. And all these things go together, really, where I know Michael Saylor's talked about the example of Argentina. He had, I think it was 1 million Argentinian pesos or something. And one day the government just said, well, your account is locked, and next week we're going to give you $100,000. It's a 10-to-1 exchange rate, so you just lost 90% of everything. I don't remember exactly the terms, but that was the moral of the story. Was he had no choice in the matter. The money he had there was devalued by 90% overnight. So that is a good example of how all 3 of those things kind of work together in the worst case scenario, where your account's locked for a period of time, everything's devalued, and you weren't free to transact for that time period. And Bitcoin just fixes all of that. If you can hold things in self-custody, none of those things become possible. So that's the message I always try to hammer home, and I'll keep explaining it for a long time, I'm sure. And I appreciate that someone out there at least appreciates this and finds it interesting and helpful. I'm blown away by the response to this podcast recently, ever since I rebranded to Hard Money Dispatch and made the focus more on Bitcoin, crypto, finance, economics. There will be some episodes on entrepreneurship and business as well in the future. And yeah, there's more people listening. I've had a bunch of people reach out wanting to be a guest on the podcast, which, by the way, if you want to be a guest, you can email me at admin@bdncontent.com, or just send me a DM on social media and I'll get you on the list. I think right now it's pretty much booked out throughout January, maybe like end of January right now. So there'll be a lot of episodes coming up where I have a guest on the show talking about whatever it is they're doing, and we'll have some interesting conversation. But this week it is just me, and that's just because I wasn't able to get anyone scheduled in time. And I'll be traveling next week, but after that, yeah, it should be a long list of episodes that have a lot of guests, and they'll be sharing all kinds of interesting things. Like the last episode with Gil Roberts, that was really cool to learn about the Bitcoin Commons protocol software, for example. And what else have we got? I think that's almost it. One last thing I want to mention is that if you have been selling any kind of crypto or you do staking for altcoins, these are all taxable transactions, right? In the case of staking or mining, those count as income. And if you sell anything at a gain or a loss, it'll be capital gains. Held for a year or more, it's long term. Held for less than a year, it's short term. These are very basic things. And I've done a lot of research and written about this a lot in the past. And it's very difficult to keep track of all these transactions. However, if you use a tool like CoinTracker, it can plug into your exchange wallets automatically and gather all of that data and put it into a nice spreadsheet for you. It can fill out the proper tax forms like Form 8949 and makes things a whole lot easier using some type of crypto tax software like that. And I don't really know how anyone would do it these days without something like that. So I will leave a link to sign up for CoinTracker if you're interested in the description of this video and this podcast. And while you're at it, if you could support the show for free, you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you can subscribe to the Hard Money Dispatch newsletter. And those are all free, easy, simple ways you can help support this show and the things I've been talking about, the message of Bitcoin's true use cases and financial sovereignty, business entrepreneurship. I think it's going to be a few weeks from now. I'll have someone on, and the conversation will be more business-oriented and less Bitcoin-oriented. And there's a handful of other guests, too, with slightly different topics. So I wasn't too sure at first, but I've decided to mix it up a little bit. Hope you guys enjoy it. If you've made it this far, thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you again soon.